Hey everyone, welcome to Watch It Play Table Talk Back. My name is Rodney Smith. In this video, we're going to take a look at your responses on the topic of promos and exclusives. Let's get started with Alex C. After watching your gameplay of Arcadia Quest, I wanted to get my hands on this game, but I quickly realized how expensive it would be to purchase the Kickstarter version, as it contains an extra campaign and an additional 21 figures that are both exclusives. I don't mind not receiving some of the extra figures, but not being able to play the campaign because it's an exclusive item, that bothers me. Now I'm left with two choices. Either wait for the base set, which won't come with those exclusives, or spend 2 times the market price to get my hands on the exclusive items. Alex is right. Arcadia Quest did come with a lot of additional features. The Kickstarter version had upgraded components, additional figures, and this separate small campaign. Now what you saw in our video was what you would get in the retail version. So none of the Kickstarter exclusives were in that gameplay example, and I always make sure that our videos contain just what comes in a retail package, because that's likely what most people get a chance to play, and I don't want people to have a false impression of what the game really is. That said, the question here is, are those exclusives important? And obviously to Alex and to other people, they are. And the idea of a separate campaign, I think, feels like you're missing out on more than just simply a few vanity figures. This is a campaign, again a small one, but it's one that many people won't get to try out. Well, except that many people will get to try it out if you think about it, because Arcadia Quest had, I believe, close to 5,000 backers. Now, I don't know what really good numbers are for an expansion print run, but 5,000 is pretty strong, I think, because that's pretty good sales for even most base games. So would the company have been able to sell as many copies once it got released into retail of this separate campaign? Now, if you want it, of course you feel like yes, but an individual doesn't really represent the marketplace. It's hard to know if they printed 1,000 or 2,000 extra copies of this expansion, would it sell for them? I'm not justifying this inclusion of a separate campaign. I just think those are questions that a company has to answer, and it's maybe not as cut and dry as it feels when it comes to our wants and desires. I'll talk a little more on my feelings about exclusives, but I do want to look at some of your other comments first. Rect says, exclusive, hard-to-get items that have a serious impact on competitive games should be a huge no, but for casual games, I don't think there's any harm. I like how Fantasy Flight Games creates alternative art versions of cards for promos. I want to say, just quickly, this is something that I tend to like too, because these are promotional items that give you something special as a consumer, maybe an early adopter or a Kickstarter backer, that sort of gives you, hey, look what I've got that's unique. But it doesn't change the gameplay content really that anyone else is getting. They're going to get the same card, it's just going to have plain art. So this could also be something like, upgrading the tokens. So instead of cardboard, you get something that's plastic. Then again, Super Cheese says, I hate seeing upgraded components as a Kickstarter backer exclusive. If you make the money to make the product better, why wouldn't you keep doing that? In other words, once you've raised the funds to upgrade the components, why not keep them upgraded for every version of the game, including the retail one? Now, I don't know the details specifically, but if memory serves me correctly, Jamie Stegmaier ran into this problem sort of in reverse, in a way, when he published Euphoria. This was a Kickstarter game, and there was an exclusive upgrade to the components with that version. Really, really nice components. But then, I think afterwards, because these upgraded elements were popular, he would have liked to have offered them to future retail purchasers as well, but because he had promised them as a Kickstarter exclusive, it would have felt like a betrayal of those people who backed the game early, who invested early. So he hasn't been able to do that, not in good conscience. So even a publisher can sometimes find exclusive items somewhat limiting. Gareth Palmer writes, I don't have much experience with it as far as board games go, but I do like them with video games. If I can get extra stuff for a game I was going to pre-order anyway, sweet. Well, since doing Watch It Played, I haven't really been buying as many video games, and I've kind of forgotten how prevalent promos and exclusives are there. Nick Scheffler wrote about it a little bit more as well. He said, I've been playing video games for over 15 years. When I hear there's exclusive content for pre-orders on video games, I don't have much interest because it's just more digital cosmetics, usually, and these don't have much impact on the game. However, when receiving content for tabletop games, you're receiving physical items. The physical nature of tabletop gaming makes me much more upset when I don't receive every piece available at launch. So maybe there's a perceived difference in physical versus digital components. I wonder though if it's also about perceived quantities. What am I trying to say here? In a digital universe, you're going to have hundreds, maybe thousands of characters, NPCs, monsters, weapons, items, and so one more thing amongst thousands doesn't seem like a lot, whereas in a board game, you might be talking about tens of 20s, maybe hundreds of components. So one or two things seems like a larger piece of the puzzle that you're no longer getting access to. I wonder if that's a part of it. Canyon Lin wrote, I hate exclusives. The term means to exclude, essentially. I love promos though, paid for or not, because the main part of promos is that they're promotional. And you receive them for your love of the game, and you can get one if you fail at getting it the first time. It may cost extra money or require going to a convention, but they are findable, assuming that they're not exclusive promos. I just like this comment because I think, well, first of all, there is some gray area, isn't there? Because some promos are so hard to get, they may as well be exclusive. And that made me wonder, is that part of what's going on here? You know, a common thread in the replies was that people seem to be more comfortable with promos they may be able to get than exclusives they know they can't get. So is it a perception thing? Is it that we don't want to be told, no, you can't have this? And we're more comfortable with the idea that, okay, we likely won't be able to get the promo, because more people will not have a promo than those that will have it. But the idea that you might be able to get it makes it a little easier to swallow? Maybe.
Baker from Board Online, Board Offline here. Exclusives and promos. I gotta say, they've never bothered me. I don't know if it was due to my coming up into the hobby through things like Magic the Gathering or even collecting baseball cards before that. So now that I'm into board gaming, the idea of an exclusive doesn't bother me too much. Promos definitely don't bother me. No one has entitlement to anything that somebody wants to make. If that's the way a designer or a publisher wants to make a game and it bothers you, the way you tell them it bothers you is you don't buy the game. You know, nobody's forcing anybody to buy a game, and therefore we don't have the right to feel entitled to every little bit and piece that might come out that has to do with that game.
Pete Sheary writes, sometimes, although I hate to admit it, I will not buy a game if the promos are either not available or are too expensive on a secondary market. I'm more of a completionist, and this makes it more important to me than to most of my friends. I do think promos and exclusives are harder on the collectors amongst us. But the question is being a collector a necessary part of the hobby, or is that something separate? For example, a gamer could be a collector, but you don't have to be a collector to be a gamer. Rarely do board games require you to collect, unless, of course, it's something like a collectible card game or a trading card game, something like that. So maybe the question is, although marketing people know how to take advantage of the desires of a collector when they're selling even a board game, is it necessary and is it important to service the needs of the collector when you're a publisher? George Morgan has something to say about this as well. While my completionist side always seeks out the promos to go with the base game, I will say that I have yet to have a gaming experience where I said, wow, that promo really makes this game shine. Most of the time, we're not thinking of who played what card, promo, component during a certain turn because it doesn't add that much to the overall experience. It's just those times that I'm admiring my collection when the sinister completionist side comes out. I'm a collector in a couple of areas, comic books and board games. But I am trying to curb my tendencies there because I see it as a weakness. And I'm not trying to insult my fellow collectors here, but being a collector means that marketing people can take advantage of you. And that's not a good thing, especially if you allow your collection of stuff to become particularly important to you. Now, I like having this stuff. I like that someone can look at my comic book collection and go, oh, you're a Marvel guy, and you like the Punisher. Oh, but you also like Hellboy and DMZ, and oh, what's this Lone Wolf and Cub? I've never heard of that. What's that? I like that I have this collection that's a physical representation of my tastes. But I have to acknowledge, does my enjoyment of this comic book have anything to do with the rest of my collection? Am I going to enjoy this less when I'm reading it if I don't also have this Punisher comic over here? No. Being a collector and being a comic book reader and connoisseur are two separate things. But sometimes they merge. And I think recognizing them as separate can be a helpful way in managing our expectations around exclusives and promos. Potentially. Michael Barslow wrote, most companies should do what Arcane Wonders does for the Mage Wars game they produce. They do have exclusives for Kickstarters, Dice Tower promos, and cards handed at Gen Con and other conventions. But the big thing is that they've promised that eventually they'll print the promo cards as expansions. Now I want to include that comment because I really like that approach as well, and so does Jay Donahue. He wrote, I think the promos and exclusives should be limited to early access things that will be available to everyone later on, or just simply be vanity items that don't have any effect on gameplay, but give it a little flair. For example, the Firefly board game had a promo ship that came in Game Trade magazine, but about a year later they made it available to buy, and I think that's great. I really like this too. Listen, if you're a publisher, you're trying to incentivize people to buy your game. There's hundreds of games coming out all the time. How do you rise above that noise? If you can offer something cool, something exclusive to someone because they're pre-ordering your game, or because they backed it on Kickstarter, that's great. I think most people would be okay with that coming to the game later if they knew it just was an exclusive on a timer. In other words, in a year's time, if the game is successful, and I think that's important too, a publisher shouldn't be obligated to release exclusives later because that's an expense. But if the game is popular and you're going to release an expansion, then include the promos in that for the people who come to the game later and now want to support it. I think that's a great approach, but I do have to say, I am trying to change my attitude around exclusives and to be just unconcerned about them as much as possible. Listen, Arcadia Quest is a good example. I don't have the extras, the upgraded components, all the extra figures, that separate campaign, and I'm going to try to get them if I can. But if I don't, then I'm going to try to recognize the existence of some other product out there somewhere in the world and somebody else having it should not affect my enjoyment of the product that I have in front of me. If I like this game, not having some other element of it shouldn't change that. I mean, what I'm saying is I think a lot of it's psychological, and I don't want psychological tricks or compulsions to overwhelm my enjoyment of anything. Now here's a thought. If I buy a game, and let's say I'm enjoying it, and then I discover there's an expansion for this game, but it's currently out of print, should that diminish my enjoyment of the game? Because, I mean, effectively, that's like an exclusive. It's a whole section of content I can't have to play with this game that I was enjoying before I found out about the expansion. To take it to another level, I suppose all games are technically exclusive, even the base version of the game. If you don't get it during its initial print run and they don't print it again, then I suppose the game itself is exclusive. I would love to have Necromunda. I had that when I was a kid. I foolishly got rid of it, and I have all this nostalgia wrapped up in it. But that game was exclusive to the first thousands of people who it was printed for. Now that's taking it to an extreme, and I realize that. But I think it makes the point about how we can allow our wants and our desires to influence our enjoyment of things, maybe in ways that are not entirely rational. And listen, I say that and I see that in myself just as much as anyone else. So I think it's an interesting topic. And if you have other comments, other thoughts that maybe this has provoked, certainly put them in the comments below. But until the next episode, thanks for watching.